G'day, and welcome to SMPD, the podcast where we look back at the shows that shaped our childhood. I am Chris Bolton. With me, as always, my partner in podcasting, Mr. Mark Williams.
Hello.
And this episode, I've dropped the accent already, listeners, because like, there's one thing I can do in Australian, and that's g'day. And maybe that's not a knife. This is a knife. And even that wasn't great. So we're dropping it right there. It didn't feel right to not greet you appropriately, because this episode we are looking back at Neighbours. Now you heard the genesis of this on air, listeners. For regular listeners, it was I think a couple of months ago on air. We just suddenly went, why isn't Neighbours on our list? Because it should be.
Yeah.
And so lo and behold, it got put on the list, and it feels like an appropriate time to do this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's we're into the last week now. That's a week and a half. It's finishing on the 29th or the 30th of this month, whatever day the Friday is.
Yeah, it's the 29th, I think it finishes.
Yeah, that's the Friday. That's the Friday. Yeah, and so it's drawing to an end. And I think that at one point in this country, this was must-see TV. Everybody was watching this fucking thing at one point.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And by the way, listeners, before we dive in, I forgot to mention at the start, apologies for Mark sounding like he's in a toilet tonight. We've had some technical issues. Yeah, so we thought it was better that we drop back onto a reliable microphone. We're having some issues. But yeah, you're right. This was must-see TV. And I think it probably remained must-see TV generation to generation. Like for me, there is a period of Neighbours that I watched.
Yeah.
And then I've never watched it ever again since. But there was certainly a time where unless I was out of the country, we went on holidays during the summer, unless I was out of the country, I would not miss Neighbours. And actually, because of the timing of school holidays and their seasons, I would normally even then only miss like an episode or two, because this didn't actually, I don't know if you remember, but this didn't run through holidays, because even though it's a soap opera, there were seasons or series as we called them then. Now, I didn't realize that until I got older and started actually looking into it a little bit, because I have dipped into it a bit.
I didn't know that. I did not know that.
Yeah, it wasn't on for periods through the summer holidays, which used to annoy the fuck out of me, because I wanted to watch it.
You're right. We used to watch it. My gran used to watch it. And we used to spend all of our school holidays with my grandparents. And yeah, you're right. Like it was half term and shit. It was always on, and Easter was always on. But then in the summer they'd have a break.
Yep.
So then all of a sudden we'd be there. It's like, oh, well, the news is finished. Where's Neighbours? Oh, fuck. Right, we've got to go and play now.
Yeah. I can't for the life of me remember what they used to put on instead now, but there was definitely there was a period of it, and they didn't have a massive break. It was only like 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So either end of the holiday, normally, like for the first week or so of the holiday, it would be on, and for like the last week of the holiday, it would be on. But there would be a period in the middle where you wouldn't get Neighbours. And at the time, I
think that was their catch-up point as well, because I think at the time that when they were making it, and I'm doing this from memory, so I might be slightly off, I think we were showing it daily, whereas it was only actually being shown in Australia 4 days a week.
Right. So I didn't realise that.
That break was their chance to basically where we caught up with them. And then they could get ahead, because obviously with the licensing rights at the time, as they were with between Fremantle and BBC, they had to air first in Australia. Whereas by the time you've got the Channel 5 deal, it's okay. Well, if you've had an episode on Monday, it's on here Tuesday, and it may have even evolved now so it's on the same day. I don't know. But I mean, at one point, this was bigger than fucking Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, this was huge. When I'm sure it was the same for you as well. This was huge around my school. Like everybody, like you had Neighbours and you had Home and Away, and Home and Away was always like the red-headed stepchild. Like I've never even really bothered watching it. Like I was flat, and they were on at different times. One followed the other immediately. You could finish Home and Away on ITV and flip straight over to Neighbours.
Yeah, you catch the end of fucking Blue Peter or whatever it was, and then straight into Neighbours.
Yeah, but I flat out just never bothered with Home and Away. I was just like, I will just go straight in at Neighbours. Sometimes I'd watch the thing twice a fucking day, because you'd have it in the afternoon, like those times where you were in half term and stuff. You'd have it in the afternoon, and then you'd have it in the evening, and sometimes I'd even watch it twice. So and I think it's the only soap opera that I can honestly say I've ever watched. Like obviously I've seen EastEnders, I've seen Coronation Street, I've seen some of the others, but I never really was asked about them. Whereas this one I just would not miss. Like I had to see it. And if I did miss it, like I'd be furious, because like the next day at school you didn't know what the fuck was going on. You had to be able to discuss this,
and that was the thing. And like it was massive at that point. So like all the way through the 90s, all the way through school, it was a case of, right, yeah, you'd have a lot of people talk about it. Not necessarily everybody, because you get the ones who are too hard to watch Neighbours, except they fucking watched it and didn't talk about it, because they realised that they were supposed to be watching rugby and stuff like that instead. So you had those kids who they knew who everybody was, they just wouldn't admit to it. So you had that, and then like for a lot of people in this country, it became a rite of passage. When you went to uni, and you didn't get out, you got out of bed at fucking lunchtime, and it was on, and you'd watch it while you're having your cornflakes.
Yeah, that was the point. Like after uni is where I dropped off, but from my early teens all the way through to the end of my bachelor's degree, like pretty much every day during that like 10-year period, I watched it.
I was the other way.
That's where I dropped off.
Like we used to watch it because my gran used to watch it, and so we'd be there on holidays and stuff. So that's how we got into it, and then we'd as time went on, we'd watch it after school and stuff. So I was probably watching it from the time I was about 7 or 8 or something like that. And then when I went to uni, ironically, we had a TV, but the building we were in didn't have a roof-mounted aerial, so you had to have an aerial on top of the TV or in the room. And where we were, such a shit signal, we couldn't pick up BBC.
Right.
So I kind of fell off it then, and I never really went back to it. So I kind of had the opposite experience of most people, whereby most people got into it at that point, and I was like, oh fuck, I can't watch it anymore. And then by the time I went into digs where there was an aerial and I could plug a TV in, I'd missed a year as I couldn't be asked anymore. Not that it would have been overly difficult for me to pick up, because the odd episode I've seen since then, with the exception of not knowing who some people are, it's not that difficult to follow. You can still kind of fall back into it.
No, I mean, the storylines are very basic, aren't they? I say that. I sat down before doing this recording this evening and tried to remember like some of my favorite storylines. And to be honest, there weren't many that I could remember. And I was like, come on, surely there's some mental stuff. Like I remember Toadie driving the car off the cliff. I remember that very well.
Yeah.
Obviously Scott and Charlene's wedding. Like that was one of the earliest things I can remember of it.
Yeah.
I can remember Susan Kennedy basically getting a brain injury because she fell over in the kitchen. Like absolutely ludicrous.
I didn't see that.
She like, what did she do? She dropped a bowl of cereal or something, and she slipped on the cereal. Like, do you not remember this? Then
no.
she got an acquired brain injury, and it basically reset her to a 16-year-old girl. She had complete amnesia.
So is that how that?
45-year-old woman.
I came back into it after that happened, so I saw the aftermath of that. Right. Okay.
Yeah. And then she had to like eventually she got a memory back and she remarried Carl. I can't remember whether this was before or after his affair, which is another thing I remember. He was carrying on with Annalise, wasn't he? Remember that?
He had the feud, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. I mean, he was
fair play for him.
He was a doctor, wasn't he? So I can remember bits and pieces like that, but I was trying to think of like, because like most soap operas have like the one really fucking mental storyline.
Yeah.
And aside from Bouncer's dream sequence, I don't know if you remember that one. There weren't many that I could really remember that were absolutely mental. I'm sure there have been, and I've just forgotten them.
And I think what you'll find as well is that like it started out, from what I remember and what I've read in the 2 minutes while I was waiting for audition to load, is that when it started out, it was very much your kitchen sink type drama. Fuck all actually happened. It was about 3 families who lived on a cul-de-sac. 2 of them didn't like each other very much, and there was this old rivalry that no fucking knew what it was about, but they just carried it on for generations. It was that sort of thing. And then you had another family who was kind of stuck in the middle of it. And then, so initially you didn't get, well, you had like the rivalry and the pranks they were playing on each other. I remember, I can't remember which one it was. I think it might have been Jason Donovan, but they changed the name of the street to Robinson Street. Like they changed the sign and shit like that. It was that sort of mundane crap. And then it got a bit serious where Daphne was in a car accident and died.
Yeah, oh yeah, Des and Daphne. Yeah, I forgot about them. Yeah.
So you had that, and all of a sudden it's like, oh fuck, okay, this isn't necessarily as fun anymore, because it's a bit real and it's a bit gritty. It's not quite as throwaway. And over time it grew, and obviously the emphasis on the local businesses grew, and they expanded who you were seeing in the streets. All of a sudden, Mrs. Mangle wasn't a secondary character anymore; she became far bigger, and they introduced her extended family. So you had Joe Mangle came into it, and his son, and then Harold came into it, his daughter, and then those 2 families moved. All this sort of stuff. So that all kind of happened, and it grew and grew and grew. And then by about 94, 95, all of a sudden you had somebody was attacked by a shark. There was a shoot. There was an armed siege in the street. And somebody, actually, same person, then got shot. It's stuff.
The siege. Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah.
All of a sudden it started building up, and it almost became more of like the American soap operas. Then all of a sudden, which became far more sensational. And whereas in like British soaps still do. I don't watch soaps. I catch them occasionally. I see stuff online about what's going on. But they'll build. No, they'll have stories, and they'll kind of build, and they'll have stuff bubbling over. But they'll take their time and build it as stuff happens in real life. It's not just right. Okay, well, something happens today, and tomorrow there's a payoff.
Yeah.
So whereas we drag things out over longer, and they tend to come at Christmas Day because that's when everyone wants to be miserable, obviously. Whereas like Neighbours kind of went down the American route, where it was like something had to fucking happen every week. It had to be mad. And Home and Away did the same as well, actually. And when I was living in Australia, again, these two things are fucking iconic status. You know, they were the shows on TV.
I was hoping to ask you about that, actually. Yeah, I'm glad you've brought that up because you've got experience from that side of the pond.
Yeah, so and I'll come back to that in a second. But they both became like that. You know, they became massive shows, and there was more money being put into it. But they relied more on set pieces. Like Home and Away, I think they had 14 murders or something, you know, over the course of the show. Neighbours hasn't been quite that bad, but they've had these big shows that they've had. You know, they've had the armed robbery and the siege. They've had they've had stuff going on where there's been explosions and around the coffee shop and the hotel and all that sort. So they've had these big.
Did someone blow Lassiter's up once, or did it catch on fire? No, I think it caught on fire. Yeah, somebody set it on fire, didn't they? There was an arson attack. Yeah, I remember that as well. So as you're saying these things, I'm like, I remember.
Back in, and I haven't seen the show for years. And I went on to, every now and again. I'll see an advert. I'll be watching something on my 5, and I think, oh yeah, you get an advert. I think, oh, you know what? It's looking quite entertaining. I'd be quite interested just to dip back in and see what it's like. And obviously, with it ending now, so there's a lot of stuff online about so-and-so's coming back, and so this one's coming back to this, and that's happening, that's happening. And I'm looking, thinking, I'd be quite keen just to see who's still fucking there. And so, having now looked at a couple from last week, I know most of these characters. I don't know what the fuck's going on, but I know who they are. And they're bringing people back to try and close it out as well, which is a bit silly, really, because once you move away from a place, you tend to move away. You don't come back for one last hurrah.
Well, they'll find some way to bring them all back, won't they? There'll be some sort of big reunion event or something. But yeah, I've got a passing interest in that last episode as well, just to see who they do bring back. Bearing in mind, you know, and we can't underestimate the level of talent that has gone through this show over the years and the careers that it's actually launched. Like to get, like obviously we know Kylie and Jason are back. They've said that, so we know Scott and Charlene are back there. But then, you know, I highly doubt you're going to see Margot Robbie pop up, for instance.
I doubt
you don't know.
But Guy Pearce has already done his stuff. He's back. Apparently, Kate Winslet's been taking the piss out of him for about a month. I read it this morning that when she was younger, she used to watch it and like religiously. Yeah. So she's been texting him and ripping the piss out of him apparently for ages about him going back to Neighbours. Yeah. Didn't Russell Crowe pop up at some point as well? I don't think he was a regular, but I think he was in it.
Probably. I mean,
I'm fairly sure he appeared at one point for like a couple of episodes.
I mean, the interesting thing is what are they going to do with characters they've killed? Are they going to bring any characters back that they've killed? Because there have been several resurrections.
You had Harold Bishop died, didn't he? Because he got washed off a cliff and then turned up with amnesia.
Showed up with amnesia. What was Toadie's wife?
Dion. Yeah. She died, and then she turned up, but she was somebody else, wasn't she? And there's something pretending to be her or something. I didn't see. Yeah, I didn't see that, but I've read about that because I was trying to work out how the fuck he was still in it. But yeah, so I mean, so she came back. I don't know. Apart from that, I don't think they've really brought anybody back from the dead.
There's been ghosts as well. I remember there being ghosts.
I don't know about that.
I definitely.
You may well be right. I don't know. I don't remember.
I can definitely remember. I can't remember who it was, but I can definitely remember characters dying and then showing up as ghosts.
I know they did that in Home and Away, but I don't remember they did it in Neighbours.
I'm confused. No, I can't be confused because I really did not watch Home and Away. That was the one soap that even though
I think the only way I remember them being Home and Away was somebody died, and then like their best friend had some sort of breakdown and saw the person. So it wasn't really clear if it was a ghost or if it was her hallucinating or whatever else. But I think that's the only one I remember. I don't. Apart in Neighbours, I only remember it when Harold came back, when he had amnesia and he first popped up, and the old lady from the Robinsons, what's her name? Helen something.
Helen Robinson, yeah.
No, she had a different name. Helen Daniels. She was seeing him around the place, and she was.
She was Daniels, but it was Jim Robinson.
Yeah, because he was married to her daughter. So she was convinced that she was seeing ghosts, and then started following him around, and then
maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Then.
It was him.
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm thinking.
So maybe that was it.
It definitely wouldn't be Home and Away because that is definitely the one soap that I can honestly say I've never seen more than 5 minutes of. Even though like I didn't watch any others other than Neighbours. Like I've seen a fair chunk of EastEnders in my time. I've seen a fair, just because, like you said, like my nan watched these things religiously, and I spent an awful lot of time with my nan as a kid. So like this was the one thing. Like generally, me and my granddad got to pick whatever we wanted to watch on telly, and she would just suffer it. But at set times, like between about 7 and 8:30 every weeknight, fucking forget it. Whatever soaps on.
Coronation Street, EastEnders,
and she did the TV, lot. And that's it. She did the absolute lot. Crossroads, Emmerdale, EastEnders, Corrie, and then in the afternoons, you know, when I was home from school, in the afternoons we had fucking Flying Doctors and fucking Young and the Rest. We had all of them, like all the imports and everything. She would watch every single one. So I've seen a lot of them because I've been around them, but Neighbours is the only one I actively took an interest in. So it can't have been confusing.
Yeah, no, that's the only one I remember. So when the woman had a nervous breakdown, so it wasn't even clear if it was a ghost anyway. That's the only one I can remember.
Yeah, but I mean, bringing that back around, you know, just talking about characters, you're on about the introduction of characters there, and I think like I've gone back and watched a few that I can find, and there are actually quite a few available. The quality is varying on the rips that's out there, but there are quite a lot. So I've tried to watch a few from different eras, and there's a notable change, I think, in the style and the attitude of the show round about the time that we would have been getting into it.
Yeah.
It definitely all of a sudden skewed to a younger audience. It feels like you watch those early 80s ones, they feel like completely different shows. And I'm talking about, like, you know, even the Scott and Charlene era feels like a totally different show.
Yeah.
The show that I was watching in like 93, 94, where all of a sudden you've got like, well, it's mostly teenagers.
Yeah, they brought in new families, didn't they? So you had like the Willises, who had the surfer kid, and then the brainy kid who was going to be a doctor, and then the ginger girl because they needed a ginger. And then like you had Jim Robinson had a heart attack because Alan Dale has to have a heart attack in every fucking thing he's in. I'm right in that. He had a heart attack in 24, he had a heart attack in Neighbours, he had a heart attack in the OC. Is there anything he had a heart attack like Is there anything he hasn't had a fucking heart attack?
He's the guy you call when you want a guy that has a heart attack. Like he's an expert at acting heart attacks. That's what he does.
But yeah, so
he's a bit like the kind of performance version of Neil Buchanan. He's like, this is a heart attack, and this is a heart attack, and this is a heart attack. He's just the guy you go to.
Yeah. But yeah, so when his character was written out, and they brought in, I think it was like a nephew or something to keep that sort of side of the family in the show, and he turned up with 2 kids, and the Kennedys turned up with 3 kids, and they confused the fuck out of me because they appeared. We went on holiday for 3 weeks, and they weren't in it when we left, and they were in it when we came back. I was like, who the fuck are these people?
I think they're the only kind of new additions then, as in families that have been added from, you know, the original show forward. I think it's the Kennedys, the only ones that have really stood the test of time, as far as I'm aware.
And Toady, because like he came.
Well, Toady was with the Kennedys, though.
Well, he was, and then they introduced his family for a while. They were in it for a little bit, and then they disappeared again. And he's the only one who kind of stuck around.
The fish family, yeah, because they were all fishes as well, weren't they?
Yeah.
You had like toadfish. Was it stonefish? Was one of them as well? Wasn't there a tadpole or something as well?
There was a tadpole, and then the girl who went on to be in the 100. What's her name? Eliza. What's her face? She was one of that. She was one of them as well. She was part of that family as well.
So yeah, but I think the Kennedys like came in and established themselves and then just stayed, whereas most of the others just kind of passed through on some sort of transient. So I think the Scullys were around for quite a while as well. Certainly while I was watching it, they were there earlier on, and then
they had a couple of years. I think they sort of disappeared, and then Steph was around for a while, and then didn't she go to jail?
I don't know. I can't remember. Steph was definitely still in it when I stopped watching.
Yeah.
But what's the younger one? What was Holly Vlance's character? I can't believe
she was Felicity.
This.
She was the middle one.
Yeah.
And then it was and then the youngest one was, I want to say Michelle or something like that. She stuck around for a while, and she had that like ugly duckling phase on TV whereby she was the gawky teenager.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden she went away to summer camp, but she came back and she was 25.
Yeah. So they stuck around for a little while.
Yeah, I think they had something on 5-6 years out of it. And then so Steph, I dipped in and out for a while. I've seen the odd episode here and there, and I'm sure she went to jail at some point.
Probably.
That may have been when I was in Australia. Actually, I think I may have seen that when I was sort of flicking through channels. But I'm sure she went to jail for something. I don't know what. But then she was out, and then she was, as tends to happen with characters in soap, she went from one character, she was in a relationship from one character to another, and then probably fucked off because she ran out of men to shag.
Yeah, I mean, that's soap's view. Like everybody was shagging everybody, as is the way.
As was Stephen Dennis, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, as is the way of soaps. But the one thing I will say about it, from both my memory of it and going back and watching it now, like you drew comparisons to some of the American soaps, and I can see that, like, there is melodrama in there. But compared to like most of the stuff that we get in this country, compared to your EastEnders then and your fucking Coronation Street and stuff, it's a lot more lighthearted than some of those fucking, like, it really is. This is so fluffy.
Well, the difference is, I mean, you look at some of the Coronation Street or EastEnders, they will build up to a big set piece. EastEnders will always do it on Christmas Day because they want people to be fucking miserable. Coronation Street will probably do 2 a year, where they'll have the culmination of these big stories, but they won't always have a big set piece. And they'll have these culminations of stories which lead to some sensational exit. There'll be somebody dies, or somebody robs a bank and fucks off, or something will be the culmination of it. But it's all very grim, and all the stuff you get building up to it, there's no lightness to it. Even the stuff they try to put into make it a bit more lighthearted and trying to make it a bit more entertaining and a bit less dour, doesn't quite pay off. Whereas the difference here is, yes, okay, no, the difference with Neighbours, from what I've seen in the last couple of years and what I remember, is that you'll have these, not necessarily as long a build, but it'll be a story that's contained in 3 other stories, and it'll pull them all together. And actually, until you get to that point where somebody sets the hotel on fire or somebody gets shot or something, it's all very light, and actually thinking, yeah, this isn't really going anywhere. And so that's the difference. You don't have that. And also, you don't have all the magazines and the internet going, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and fucking ruining it.
That's a big part of it. That's a big part of it. You know, we mentioned it already that people would be talking about it in school the next day, and you wouldn't want to miss it and stuff. Because, of course, these days, if you did miss it, you'd be able to find it on the internet, or somebody would have spoiled it for you a week ago anyway. I bet if we really looked now, we'd be able to find out what the fuck's going on in that final episode. Like, if you really looked.
Well, I mean, if you go onto My 5, the Channel 5 app, I don't know how many episodes they've got on there, but they seem to go back a ways. So you could probably go back about a year.
Yeah.
And watch it and work out where the fuck you are.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about older stuff. I didn't go looking for older stuff. I remember various bits. I thought it's not like the normal shows we watch where we can say, right, I'm going to watch half a dozen from here, half a dozen from there, and it'll all come together and make sense. There are 8,900 or 8,890 something episodes. You can't do it.
No, and that's the thing with a soap, isn't it? You can't dip in one from this episode, one from from this season, one from that season, because it's a continually evolving storyline. However, having said that, I think it's interesting what you just said about like EastEnders building up to Christmas and stuff like that, and Corrie building up to their like twice annual wedding or birth or death or whatever they're going to have on there. I think one of the interesting things with Neighbours is actually they did have those big events. You know, we've mentioned a few of them already. I remember the Lassiter's fire, Toadie driving the car off the cliff, Harold falling off the cliff. There's a lot of falling off cliffs, like Neighbours stars and Disney villains. That's what happens.
Australia's whole coast. Nobody lives in the middle. Everybody lives on the coast. So cliffs. Yeah.
Why didn't they just get them bit by spiders or something? You know, that's fucking Australia as well.
They did that once. They did that with a little girl.
Did they?
Joe Mangle's adopted daughter. She got bitten by a redback or something.
All right. Okay. Well, I think because of the way the show had this break and it ran in seasons, like there was no need to build up to those, because you knew every fucking school holiday, you knew there was going to be a big thing on Neighbours, and then it would go away for like 4 weeks. And then it would come back, and sometimes it would come back with like a whole new cast of people, because they would just like, that's where the new families would get introduced. They would be at the start of the next season. You know, so it had this structure that it could rely on. So we call it a soap, and yes, it ticks all the soap boxes, but it doesn't, certainly in the way that we would think of a soap in this country anyway, it doesn't have that every day.
It kind of has that. It has the same sort of rationale as things like Casualty, which is they're classed as continuing drama. So, same as they're in the soap categories, but actually it's not constant. Like Coronation Street is on 52 weeks of the year. EastEnders is on 52 weeks of the year. If they could have 53 weeks, I'm sure they fucking would as well, because the number of extra episodes and stuff they chuck in. But yeah, so you wouldn't have that. You would have this break, and that would give you that chance to reset. So I think in that sense, you would have season. And I think when I was in Australia, they were talking about the season premiere of season whatever it was, because even if they only had a week's break, it was still a new season.
A new season, yeah, exactly. So I think they had an inbuilt structure.
That was something I hadn't really thought about.
Yeah. They had an inbuilt structure that some of these other shows are, and I do think that shows. And when we talked about the fact that it's lighter, like, yeah, I dip through it. Like, so you can't go, I'm going to watch one from season 1, one from season 2. You're going to get what's available, right? Because all 8,000 odd episodes are not on the fucking internet, right? So you just get whatever's, as you say, on My 5, there's few on YouTube as well. But what you find is that you're able to then, yes, there's a continuing story, but certainly each episode that I watched was actually very well structured. And I'm not going to say the writing is phenomenal, because it's, and I don't want to be down on it either, right? But it is a soap opera, and like the writing is scraping to the bottom of the barrel. That's what it is. Okay,
but it's
by
tight.
design.
This is the thing. It's when you look at people who work on soaps, they always say, look, you work on a soap and then you go and work on a film, or you're going to work on a play. And doing a film is a piece of piss, because you've got downtime and you've got, we've got schedules, let's do this and the other. When you're on a soap, it's like, right, we've got to get through all this shit today, because tomorrow we've got to get through all this shit. And it's just constant. You might start at 7 a.m., you might work until 10 p.m., but you are constantly, the only downtime is when they're filming somebody else's coverage. And you just hammer through it all the time. And because of that, the writing doesn't have to be particularly brilliant. It just has to get you from A to B. You never win in what they have, the TV awards, what they called. You never win Logies off it. You never win in fucking Emmys off it. Yeah, but it's functional.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't mean to be down on it, right? It is what it is, and they're writing to style, okay? Yeah. We know that soap operas are melodramatic, and we know that they're going to be cheesy, and we know they're going to be ridiculous, right? That's part of it. You're constantly having to reinvent yourself and bring up a new narrative. But what I think this actually does very well compared to some of the other ones is it does work within an episodic format. Like most soaps will literally get to the cliffhanger. Like you think of EastEnders, right? The first thing you think of is the drum beats, because you get to the cliffhanger, there's a drum beat, and it'll pick up exactly their next episode. Yes, Neighbours did that on occasion, but most of the ones I've watched had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there was there'll be an ongoing story arc like there would be in any other season of a TV show, right? There's an ongoing arc that characters are developing through and working through these issues. But also each episode had an A plot and a B plot, and the A plot would be resolved by the end of the episode.
Yeah.
And that's happened and I've watched about 6 or 7, and that happened in every single one.
Yeah.
Like every one, there was a story that was resolved.
Yes.
Now it would be different characters, in each one. It wouldn't always be about the same character. But, and then you had whatever was going to be the big storyline of the season ticking away in the background, And I think that is probably a big part of why it's so successful, because yes, we still don't want to miss it, because we want to follow those big storylines through as well, and we want to talk about it because we get invested in these characters. And let's be fair, the cast are not difficult to look at, to say the least. But there's this thing of like, it's 22, 23 minutes that it can just tell you a story in that. We spoke last week on Better Than Mario when we were talking about Velocipasta about the value of a tight narrative, that it doesn't waste your time. And so actually it can be daft and it can have a few issues, and 22 minutes. Like I literally used to watch it whilst eating my dinner. That was the way it was. Like you'd have dinner on the table, you'd be watching Neighbours. That's by the time it's finished, you've finished your dinner, and then you go out to play. That's how it worked. So it didn't ask for a big time investment, I think, either. And you were satisfied coming away from it. And that accounts for quite a lot, certainly in my book. And I think it probably even did then as a kid. I was just like, well, yeah, I'll watch it because it's 22 minutes. There's going to be at least one gag, right? Yeah. At least one instance of like very attractive people making out with each other. Like there's probably going to be some over the jumper action at some point. Like you know what you're getting.
Yeah.
Like you know what you're getting. And it's all the stuff you want as a teenager. So you watch it. Why wouldn't you? And I think that's key to its success. It doesn't. What I'm saying is, it's not only is it actually quite good, and I do think it's quite good. Even going back and watching it, I like the production values are fucking shocking. As you said, I think the writing's pretty good, and the performances. Actually, there are some really good ones in some of the episodes I've watched. Right. But it's also completely inoffensive. And I think that's, say completely inoffensive in as much as you don't walk away from it thinking that was a fucking waste of time. In terms of today's standards and it being offensive, I think this is the whitest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Quite possibly. I mean,
representation was not a thing then, was it?
No, I mean, it has improved over the years. I mean, Australia, and I'm going to generalize and be just as fucking bad as I'm about to pretend to be. I mean, I spent 2 years in Australia, and I saw a lot of institutionalized racism, especially towards to indigenous tribes and indigenous peoples. I'm probably not allowed to say indigenous anymore. There's probably some other term, I don't know.
I don't know.
But,
see, I don't know. I would have gone with indigenous
no,
as well.
sorry, indigenous or Aboriginal is wrong, because it's Aboriginal
Yes.
and Torres Islands. So yeah, there's differences there.
I mean, indigenous is a actually correct term, isn't it? So
yeah, but when it becomes a title, I'm sure somebody gets offended. I don't know, but I mean, there was a lot of negative sentiment towards indigenous people. There was also a lot of negative sentiment towards people from Asia coming in and taking all our fucking jobs.
Right.
There was a lot of anti-British sentiment because the fucking Poms, and so, well, hang on, we fucking founded you.
Fucking colonials.
I know. But yeah, and like I remember, I've told this story before. I don't know if I've told it on air, but when I was working on convoys, and we were sort of traveling 600 miles at very slow speeds because of the size of stuff we were transporting. And I spent one of the trips in a truck with a local driver, and I will apologise now. I'm not going to use the language he used, but I'll apologise for the sentiment. He tried to explain the difference between the. Not fuck. I don't have to say it, but
do it. Go for the language, listeners. You know that Mark is paraphrasing here.
Yeah.
So
no, I'm quoting. He was
okay.
teaching me the difference between the proper niggers and the European coons.
Wow.
And I was like, hang on, fucking hell, mate. You can't do that. I don't want to fucking hear it. B, you work for me, so I'm going to sack you in the morning. But that was a lot of the sentiment. Was you had these, you had the indigenous peoples who, they had their traditions, and then you had the ones who you had the descendants of, where they crossbred with the white Europeans, and now all of a sudden it tainted all the culture. And I said, hang on, you're descended from white British people who came and colonized the place, mate. You're in no fucking position to talk. But that was the attitude, and the sentiment was that these same as you had in America up until the 60s, and these were less. These were subpar people. They weren't people. They were like an eighth of a person, and that was the way they were treated. I was like, fucking hell! It was. I've read about it. I've seen it in TV and shit. And I know it happened. It wasn't something I expected to experience in 2013.
No, and I mean that. Yeah,
and that did get sacked as well. I made sure of that.
Yeah, you did the right thing. I don't think that there's anything intentionally offensive like that in here, but no. I do think like it's very. I think even for then it was very off key with his representation.
But I mean, Melbourne is a very European city anyway, so it's probably the quote unquote whitest of the cities in Australia. It certainly was 10 years ago.
But even so, like some representation at least,
Yeah. And I mean, and that did come through later. No, that as you got through the 90s, that did pick up. You did get that, not as much as you should have.
And not, and not just cultural backgrounds either, and ethnicity. Like it is full of straight white people. Like that's what this is. Like there's an attractive straight white people at that. Like it is very. It's very old TV in that sense, even for the time it was on, even when you look at this in the mid 90s, at this time over here in our country, we had people of all different ethnicities in Albert Square on EastEnders because it's set in East London. Yeah. Coronation Street, same thing.
To be fair, there are too many white people in EastEnders.
to be accurate, yeah. We had round about this time, if not slightly later, we had our first transgender character in a soap opera in this country, Coronation Street as well. Yeah. So we were, and one thing soap operas have to do if they're going to be really soap opera-y is reflect the world around them. Like it's kind of, that's the whole point. It's kind of a window into people's lives, isn't it? It's the curtain twitcher of it. So it has to look accurate. And so I guess if that's what Melbourne was like in the mid 90s, then I guess at least it's accurate is what I'm saying. But certainly it rankled me watching it. I was like, hang on a minute. Like every single person here looks the same. This is, but they do. They absolutely do. If that makes me racist towards Australians, then I'm sorry it does. But I was just watching it going like, come on, surely there's more than like one type of person in Australia, isn't there? Like
Yeah, absolutely.
Even the fucking dog was blonde, for Christ's sake.
But Bouncer was. Was Bouncer the first dog or the second dog?
There were two bouncers, weren't there? Wasn't there a bouncer? Then Bouncer ran away, didn't he?
One drowned. I know that.
Yeah, I think all the dogs were Bouncer.
I don't think the first one was whatever Bouncer was. I think it was a different breed, but I don't think it was blonde. The first one.
Bouncer definitely was.
Bouncer was, yeah, but I think the original dog wasn't Bouncer.
Can't remember.
It's a long time ago. We're talking fucking 30 years. I can't remember the shit.
Bouncer's the one I remember because Bouncer is pretty much synonymous with Neighbours at this point. You say Neighbours, you think of a few things, and Bouncer's one of them.
Yeah, like Bouncer, Kylie,
the theme tune,
which has changed again.
Yeah,
so you had the original. They did a sort of upbeat poppy version of it towards the mid 90s.
Right, that's the best version of it, and that's the one you will have heard at the start of this show, I guarantee you, because that's the one that I think of.
Yeah, it evolved again. So, when I was in Australia, there was a different version of that. It was a slightly pared down version, and then there's another version of it again now. There may be others as well I haven't seen, but they've all kind of evolved from that original poppy one.
The original one is the really cheesy one that most people think of straight away, apart from me, and I guess you, from what you've said as well. Like, I go to that mid-90s one, which is where, like, they changed the credits as well, and they had, like, each house had its own kind of splash screen in the credits with all the people that were living in that house.
And the way they've kind of moved that on now, so the houses aren't the characters, the houses aren't what you see, but you see the family groups. So everybody's together and their names are on screen with the actor's name as well. So you get all of that front loaded as well. So your credits at the end, like 10 seconds, where it tells you who wrote it, directed it, produced it, and that's it.
Right. Yeah. No, that was the best version. That's the one I'm going to put in the front. I'll probably put the old theme tune at the end. But we do have to talk about that theme tune as well, because I think
because there were two. There was an intro and outro. The outro didn't have any words to that.
No, whereas the intro did.
Yeah.
I think. Didn't the outro? I think the outro did still have "That's when good neighbors become good friends" at the end, but that was it.
But you didn't have the rest of the lyrics.
Yeah, but like in the pantheon of iconic TV themes, like this isn't me making a case to say it's good, because I don't think it is.
No,
even my favorite version of it.
It's cheesy as balls, but it works. It kind of set the tone for what you were getting, especially in those early years when it was this kind of twee show about these three families on a street who didn't fucking like each other.
Yeah, and I guarantee you, like, if you were playing some sort of musical version of Family Fortunes where you just had to go to people and say, right, sing a theme tune, within the first 5 answers, somebody's going to start singing Neighbours. Yeah. Like, it's just, it's massive, isn't it? Like, you can't escape it. It's another one of those theme tunes that I will take with me to my grave.
But it's a proper earworm as well. Every version of it is a proper earworm.
Yes, it is, definitely. Like I say, I don't think it's good. I just think you can't talk about this show without talking. I mean, to be fair, the best thing about Home and Away was the theme tune as well. And I'd argue that's actually a better song than the Neighbours one.
Yeah, it's a good track, that one.
Like, it is actually quite a good theme tune, that. But Neighbours is the one you remember, isn't it? I think. Okay, so, right, best era then, Mark. Wait, like, even within our time of watching it, like, because it went through a lot of changes in the time.
It did. I'm probably going to go for that. So, in terms of some of my recollection, I'm going to go for that period of 94, 95 up until about 96, 97. That span where you had the old guard had gone at that point. So the Robinsons had gone, most of the Ramsays had gone, and they started introducing the younger cast, and the storyline started getting a bit more engaging for young people. Whereas you had more stuff at school. You had stuff about drugs. You had stuff about bullying. You had stuff about drink driving, which people of our age would then get to that age where we would have started drinking, and we would have been looking at starting to drive in the next couple of years as well. So it was more relevant at that point. I'm not saying better. I don't know. I having not watched all 30 whatever years of it is, I can't say categorically one section was better than the other. But certainly for me, that's the era that I think of, and that's the group of characters.
Yeah, I think this is one of those shows though that regardless of quality of it, it isn't going to be about what's the best written era, what's the best produced era. It's going to be what characters do you remember the most fondly? And I'm in the same boat as you there. It's like, but after the old guard had gone, and then we were into, say, the new old guard, if you like, of the Kennedys, the Fishes.
Yeah.
then the Scullys moved in, and that's the period where I was like, because let's be fair, all them Scully girls were worth watching.
Well,
So
two out of three were.
2 out of 3, yeah. But come on, one of them was very small, so that goes without saying. Well, I don't.
No, that goes without saying.
Yeah.
That goes without saying.
For us,
leave it at that point. But yeah, so I think and I think we had a similar conversation when we talked about Grange Hill, didn't we? About everyone will have their period. It's the same as Doctor Who and James Bond and things like that. Everyone will have their particular emphasis, their particular focus, and the bit that they think is best for whatever their reasons are, and their reasons are as valid as anybody else's. But I think it's very much applicable here. Of a show that's run through 30, nearly 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Around from 85, so it's been going for nearly 40 years. Everybody's going to have that. Everybody's going to identify with at least a part of it.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and yeah, it was that period as well where I haven't talked about it yet. We've talked about it briefly when I said I was trying to remember storylines. That it's that period that gave us the storyline that I always think of when I think of Neighbours, which is the death and return of Harold.
Yes.
And then the love triangle between Harold, Lou, and Madge. Yeah. Which just seemed to go on forever.
Well, and they did really well with that because Luke Carpenter was always one of these characters. He was always sort of around as he was a bit shifty, and he flitted in and out. And early on you saw him because he was. I want to say he was a car salesman or something like that. And again, they made a very big deal of the fact he was really shifty and want to buy a watch and all the rest of it. So they built him up as this almost this nefarious character that you were predisposed to dislike.
Yeah.
And then they went, hang on, we'll seem like this. Let's bring him in and we can have more of this story with Harold, Madge, and Lou. And we can build up this rivalry. And so they did in Coronation Street with probably the 2 least likely fucking womanizers ever, Ken Barlow and the other one played by Johnny Briggs. But so it was similar to that. You had basically this love triangle between 3 fucking pensioners, but it was funny and it was sweet in places, and it was
very sweet.
And then you got it, and then obviously it came to a point where she had to make a choice. So she chose Harold because he was the nice one and all that. And then they kind of dropped it, and then they brought in somebody completely different to Madge for Lou to then fall for, and then he became a character of his own, and had a life of his own within the show. And we said about the way they tended to bring new characters in and new groups in was to use that season break as a bit of a somebody news moving in episode 1. They occasionally did bring in people because they appreciated that actually people do have pasts and people have lived elsewhere and worked in places and they do know other people other than their neighbours. So they brought in other people, and that's how they brought Lou in, and then they brought. I think he had a daughter who was quite hot.
Yeah, he did have a daughter. Yeah.
Definitely. I'll remember her name in a minute because I remember her being quite hot. So they brought her in, and then the woman that he was involved with, and her mother moved in, and she had 2 kids, and so they then expanded that way as well. And it seemed very organic actually in the way they did it. It wasn't just right. Here's a new family, have that. Here's a new family, have that. It was okay. Well, people are moving into the street, but it wasn't just this house is for sale because that character has been written out. Somebody needs to move into that house because that did happen, and that's where the Kennedys came from because the Willises left.
Willises left, yeah, that's right.
And they were in Des and Daphne's house, which really fucking threw me. But also you had this this osmosis of real life where we went, okay, well, she's there and she's got kids from a previous marriage. So now she's appeared, she's a landlady of a pub, and now all of a sudden she's moved in with Lou and her kids have come along. So all of a sudden we've got 3 new characters. Then her mother turned up, we had 4 new characters. So it just seemed to grow in the way that some communities do as well. There was quite an organic evolution to it.
Yeah, there was. And you touched on something there that I want to circle back around to shortly. But yeah, the whole love triangle thing, as you say, was quite sweet in places. And I think what was enduring for me and why it was the first thing I thought of was actually the way that they handled it then with Madge's eventual death. And then these 2 rivals actually forming this kind of odd couple relationship where they're just best friends and they get in each other through the loss of this person that meant a huge deal to both of them. And it's so sweet. And there's such a good double act that has always resonated with me. That is the one storyline that I will always come back to. If somebody says Neighbours to me, like obviously you go to the wedding because like at that point, probably the 2 biggest stars in the UK, to be fair, are getting married on TV. So you obviously go to that. And then, I go straight to that as the one that I remember. And everything that goes with it, as I say, Harold falling off the cliff and then, Madge in the meantime hooking up with Lou and then Harold coming back and all of that. But you mentioned there about the way that characters would move out of Ramsay Street and then new characters would move in, and it did mess with your head because I remember as a kid keeping a running chronology of the houses. It was almost like the houses became characters themselves.
Yes.
And you could be like, oh,
very much so, yeah.
And you're right. You were like, right, well, that's Dez's house, but now the Kennedys are in it. So
I know the Kennedys have been there for 28 fucking years, so it's
and
clearly their house.
And it's now the Kennedys' house. Yeah, exactly. Same as the Robertsons' house. And you're like, all of this sort of history in these buildings.
Yeah.
You know, and again, it just kind of mirrors the world around you, and you see that as people come and go, and houses change hands, you know, and families move out and families moved in, but they always found a way to make it feel organic. It wasn't just, and I think part of that was in keeping, and they didn't have to do this really. I suppose there's a cost saving element to it make sense, but they always kept the base structure of those sets, like the layout of that house.
And stuff.
Yeah, the layout of that house always looked the same. It would just be redecorated.
Yeah, so that's right. And then when you had new characters coming in as well, where like they introduced, there was a very sort of school mommy. She was the headmistress, and everybody hated her. She was really really aggressive. That's it. And then so they brought her in as a character, and also she lived on the street, and you got to see her as a person, and she took in the pregnant teenager and all the rest of it. And they built up, and then all of a sudden there's like, oh fuck, there's a new house on the street. But it's just, and obviously just because the character who'd lived there before, we'd never been introduced to. So all of a sudden, there was the cul-de-sac, which I can't remember the name of the cul-de-sac now, but I think there was something like 12 or 15 houses on it. Yeah. And so at some point, they just went, you know what, chuck me now one. Chuck me now one. We haven't used that one yet. That's fine.
Dorothy is, like, if you ask me to name Neighbours characters, Dorothy.
I remember her name was Dot. I didn't remember because Tori has an aunt Dot who's very similar. And
it's why I was on it straight away then. It's one of the first ones I named. For some absolutely inexplicable random reason, she was a favourite character amongst my sort of school group that would talk about this. We had a real soft spot for Dorothy Burke. I don't know why, because she was, but I think it was actually her character progression is actually one of the best, I would say, in the show. Looking back, because she went from, originally when they started bringing these younger kids in and these teenagers, they needed like a school mom. And that's how she started out, as that kind of strict authoritarian, very prim and proper. Yeah. And then they did soften her, and you did see the other side where, like you say, she was taking people in, and then she had a relationship with not a sexual relationship, but she had a relationship with Joe Mangle that was quite kind of motherly as well, because Mrs. Mangle had passed away by that point.
Yeah, because then I think he then left to go to England, and his son stayed with her, didn't he?
Yeah, but he was there. Yeah, so they had a sort of a thing going on as well, and she was just a character that I associate with this show. She's one of the characters that I go to, and she was in it for quite a while as well. And then because at that period as well, when the kids were coming in, the high school became a big location. Prior to that, everything had been, you were either in the street or you were at Lassiter's. But then all of a sudden you had the high school as well, and so she was the link to that. So
I think part of that. I think part of that in terms of, obviously the show was getting more popular, it's getting bigger, but I think also a lot of Home and Away took place in the school. And I think they realised that actually we're a bit behind the curve here, because we're focusing on adults who are having their lives, and they've got kids who are top end of school, and they're not in school anymore. And there is actually, if we want to appeal to a younger audience, we need to have kids, and kids live in streets, so it kind of makes sense. So I think they realised they missed a trick there. So then it was around about probably around 92, 93, they started using the school as a sort of a very common venue. Yeah. And I don't know how long that progressed for. I've not watched it for years, so I don't know.
I remember them spending a huge amount of time around the school when I was watching it, because otherwise, what you do, like at Lassiter's, there was just a pub and a coffee shop. Yeah. And like, look, regardless of what regardless of what Home and Away might have you believe, or any one of a million other American teen shows, like, teenagers don't hang out in coffee shops. They can't fucking afford to, for one.
Yeah, they hang around outside the spa.
Yeah, exactly. They're buying a bottle of White Lightning, hanging around outside the spa, and probably getting into fights. Like, or maybe that's just where I grew up. I don't know. But we certainly never went for fucking coffee. Right? Well, It's just not something that we did. That was far too civilized.
By the time I was in Australia, so I was there 2012, 2013, and that side of culture had kind of pervaded, where we do have that coffee culture. There are more Starbucks than churches in most countries. Thank fuck. And Australia's no different. So I mean, that by the time we were there, that was kind of evident. But yeah, certainly in the late 80s, early 90s, kids didn't hang around in coffee shops unless they were with their parents.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Like coffee shops were somewhere that old people went.
Yeah.
Like, and you're right. Yeah, that changed in the early 2000s with the advent of Starbucks. Of course it did. But yeah, certainly back then, no, they wouldn't be hanging around in fucking coffee shops. I'll tell you where that changed. That changed with Friends is where that changed.
Yes, it did. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, let's not beat around the bush. It's not Starbucks. We can say it's Starbucks all you like. It's not. It's Friends.
Well, no, Starbucks. Yeah, I mean, coffee shops and certainly the chains, they grew because of that. No, they didn't cause that. They're a direct response to that.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, the school was required, and I think, unlike most other soap operas, where I think there will probably be a lot of storytelling gymnastics to get characters lined up to tell whatever ridiculous storyline you need to. This always felt more organic for those reasons. It's like, right, we're bringing teenagers in, so where are the teenagers going to be? The school, right? Okay. So what stories can we write about the school? And then what other characters are in the school? And then you get this sort of transition then where you bring Dorothy in, and you have her taking in the pregnant teen as well, and all of this. And it just felt organic the way this worked. At no point did it feel, and I'm sure, of course they were, but at no point in my memory anyways, I say, because we haven't been able to sit down and like watch this start to finish. But at no point did I ever sit down and think there was a bunch of people in the room going like, right, we blew someone up last year. What can we do to top that? Oh, let's have a plane crash. Right. How do we top the plane crash? Let's have an earthquake.
Yeah.
Like, it just didn't feel like that, which is certainly how EastEnders feels.
Yeah, and that comes back to what I was saying earlier on. I mean, it started out as this, tweet's probably the wrong word, but it started as this show about three families living on a cul-de-sac, and nothing happened. It was hijinks and escapades, and nothing fucking happened. And yeah, you're right. It didn't grow into let's drop a plane on it and kill half the cast. Let's have some random runaway truck full of chemicals drive down and poison the water. It was just, right, this is what happens in life. You have teen pregnancies, you have kids getting addicted to drugs, adults getting into financial troubles, all this stuff that people go, oh, fuck. Right, I recognize that.
Yeah.
That happened to my mate.
Yeah.
Or, shit, that happened to me. Or, hang on, am I doing that? That doesn't fucking look right. And as much as we don't like to admit it, and be it Neighbours or EastEnders or anything else, these things hold a bit of a mirror up, and we actually see ourselves as some of these characters. We go, oh fuck, maybe I shouldn't do that.
Yeah, there's catharsis in it, isn't there? There's catharsis in it, I think. And actually, we've mentioned our soaps, we've mentioned American soaps, but if anything, I think this is closer. And you hit the nail on the head earlier. In that respect, I think this is closer to something like Grange Hill, to those teen dramas where they weren't reaching for those ridiculous storylines. It was just like, oh, Tucker's been caught cheating this week and he's got to go to detention. And now because he's gone to detention, like he's missed a date with somebody. It's like all these random stupid problems.
Yeah.
That actually.
But when you're 15, they are problems.
And they're massive problems.
Yeah.
It is the end of the world when you're 15.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think this was very good at that.
Yeah, and I mean, it has evolved. As I say, we did get the more sensational stories. I mean, I picked up, because I've just been thinking, right, we're at the end, and I'll try and catch up with the end. I might have to go back about a month and try and work my way through it. But the first episode I put on today was, what day are we today? Wednesday today. It was Monday's episode, and it was picking up from a cliffhanger on Friday where Paul Robinson's son's in jail and is about to be beaten up, and somebody else has been shot or stabbed or something, and their girlfriend is holding a doctor at gunpoint, telling them to fix the one who's been injured, otherwise they're going to get Paul Robinson's son murdered. So, okay, not exactly your kitchen sink drama. Yeah. And coming back into, I probably haven't done it justice because there's probably months worth of work has gone into setting that story up and getting him into jail and all that.
Yeah, because you are, well, as we know, you're coming up to the end of the season. Yeah. You're coming up to the end of the series, in fact.
So all of a sudden they're going, right, we need to wrap all this stuff. We need to give these people either a happy ending or an unhappy ending. We need to give them something to do to finish off the show. And as I came into a point where, okay, well, she's got a gun. I don't know who she is. I don't know who she's pointing the gun at. I don't know who's injured on the floor. I don't know who the dude in prison is. I don't know who the dude who's about to kill him is. So I know fuck all about what's going on in this scene. But what the hell's going on here? I could do that. All right, okay. And then watching through, so that was Monday's episode. So I've watched Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. And now I'm all caught up on that. That bit's done now. I can go into something else.
I
And
didn't.
one of the original fucking cast has turned up.
I didn't make that mistake of trying to catch up with anything current. I watched one or two and then just jumped backwards because I think I would fall down that rabbit hole.
Well, that was my thing. I was thinking if I try and work out where we are, because it's finishing next week, so there's only like 2 weeks left. If I can pick that up, and as I picked it, if I picked it up Friday's episode, it probably would have been fine. But I think in terms of just knowing what's going on and where people are and where they've been positioned, how they're being set up to finish, you probably need to go back about a month or so.
Yeah.
I may do that. I probably won't have time, let's be honest, because
So
that's a big commitment.
Yeah, it is. Is there any sign of any of these old cast coming back yet?
So Shane Ramsay, who's in the very first episode, he popped up. Stephen Dent's still in it. The Kennedys are in it. I don't know when Mike turns up, but he's been mentioned a few times in the episodes I've watched.
Okay.
I don't know when Kylie and Jason are turning up.
They're going to do like minutes. Minutes of the last episode. Yeah, because you're not paying those two. But
yeah, saying that, I'm fairly sure they'd have done it for shits and giggles anyway.
Neither of them need the money, do they? Let's be fair.
Well, I don't know how many drugs Jason Donovan's taking these days.
He's clean now, isn't he? Yeah, he's been clean for a long time.
It's not the 90s anymore. But yeah, so they haven't turned up yet. But again, they started sowing seeds with other people turning up. One of the Kennedy kids turned up this week. So they are building up to this point. I'm not sure what's happening. I think I've sort of half read what the story. I think that the area has been that part of areas has been sold off for developers, so the houses are all going up for auction to be dismantled. In fact, I think that's the only way you can end a show like this is by taking away the constant. Yeah. So I think that's what's happening, but I'm not quite sure how that's going to pan out.
Why didn't they just have Bouncer wake up and realize it had all just been another dream?
Yeah, just get out of the shower.
Yeah, it would be just Bouncer just come out of the lake, just wander out of the lake after a swim.
Yeah, walk back to the house, let himself in, and close the door behind him.
Yeah,
drop down.
Bouncer did drown. Bouncer did drown. I remember this now. Bouncer drowned.
I can't remember.
He drowned. I can remember this. Somebody threw a ball, I think. I'm positive I can remember Bouncer drowning.
Yeah, I vaguely remember. It's been 30 years. I can't fucking remember.
Certainly did. Almost certainly did. Maybe this is Mandela effect, but I need to know.
Possibly.
Hang on. Google is your friend. Bouncer. Carry on. Phil, while I'm Googling this.
I was going to do that before you said the word Phil. Now it just looks like I'm padding. It's quite funny. I mean, you were talking earlier on about things certain storylines you remember. And so you obviously had the love triangle with Lou, Harold, and Madge, and you had the wedding stuff. But there are also like images and sort of secondary stories that kind of stick out as well. So I mean, there was one with I can't remember his name. He was the eldest of the Willis children. He was the one who was going to be a doctor. And he was like jobbing on his own man's building site, and he caught his son in a cement mixer. I always remember that because I was terrified of cement mixers for a long time after that because I had moving parts. I'm like, that my hand was going to get stuck. Not that I was anywhere near fucking cement mixers at that time because I'd have been about 8. But it's just one of those that kind of stuck. And then the one where fucking Christian Schmidt's character, sorry, I just clicked my fingers, so I'm trying to remember. Christian Schmidt's character, I think his name was Todd. He was raced into the abortion clinic to try and stop Phoebe from getting an abortion, and he got run over by a van. I remember that the image of that because they went to this really, really close up shot of his face to a point where you could see the fucking vein in the front of his head, in the front of his forehead. So there are images that sort of pop up as well, and it's quite interesting that when looking back at some of this stuff, you think, I have no idea why that's still in my head. That means fuck all. It's absolutely inconsequential, but I can still remember 30 years.
You remember it, yeah. So Bouncer has his own wiki page.
Yes.
I can't find anything specific about how he died, but he did die. I've seen that. And also the dog himself sadly died of cancer at the age of 7, shortly after finishing his stint on the show. However, the character, Bouncer, is confirmed as returning for the 30th episode.
Okay.
I don't know. Like he's the longest living dog in history.
Well, yeah.
At that point, maybe the other dog drowned. Then you did say there was another dog.
There was a dog because it was Joe Mangle's kid's dog, and they were at a beach. And I think that was the one with the ball. I think it chased the ball into the sea.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
I remember going in for a ball.
Yeah, and then a couple of days later, there was a little blonde puppy.
Yes, that would be it then. Yeah, and that was
sure,
Bouncer.
that's it.
Yeah, and then
That's
pretty
it.
much everyone in the street owned Bouncer at some point.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He was a proper tramp. Like he just went from house to house to house.
To be fair, so did most of the cast.
Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, I don't know. Like I could, in all honesty, I could talk about Neighbours storylines all night. I think. Like the more I said, I had to sit down and try and think of some earlier, and I was scratching my brain. But the more we talk about it, and it comes out in conversation, like this stuff is still in there. I just need reminding, and it will come out because this was such a huge part of my childhood. It really was. This show was massive, and I don't think I could ever say it was my favorite show. Even not in the way that we've talked about shows like Batman and He-Man and even Games Master a couple of weeks ago. It wasn't a show that I necessarily looked forward to,
but it was a
show it was a constant. It was a show I never missed.
Yeah,
and I think we talked about it being cathartic. Like there's an element of like it was a bit of a comfort blanket. At the end of the day, you'd get home, even if you had a shitty day at school, you get home and it would be like, right, tea's on the table, Neighbours is on.
Yeah,
like.
And that's it. And I mean, in this country, it's got this sort of almost iconic status, this kind of legendary status. And I think there was even a point where it was it was being described as like the Queen Mother's favorite TV show, just to give it that air of fucking gravitas that the royal family watched it.
Yeah.
So I mean, you had that, and then I said we talked about earlier on, so I didn't really go into detail. But when I was living in Australia, it had the same. It was dealt with in the same sort of way that that EastEnders or Coronation Street is dealt with here. It's a constant show. It's always on. People love it. It's primetime TV. It's like the start of prime time. I think it's like 6:30, 7 o'clock. And it was repeated. It was repeated. It was on earlier in the day as well, so it was repeated. So you did get it twice in a day. But it was event TV. It was even though it was daily. This was the fucking thing. You have a This Week on Neighbours on Monday morning when the news was on. You'd have a This Week on Neighbours. They'd be telling you what the fucking stories were for this and playing you the trailer for the week, and it was absolutely massive. And I think the problem they've had with it, and the reason they're ending it is, I think Fremantle got a bit greedy. And I think what happened was they kind of said, right, well, we can produce it. We'll charge Channel 5 and our broadcasters around the world. We'll charge them this much for the broadcast rights around the world. We won't put any money into it ourselves. We will use that money to make the show. And the majority of that money was coming from Channel 5 in the UK. Now, Channel 5 is it's a private entity. It's not the BBC, which is publicly funded. So there was only a finite amount of money there. And the difference between this and something like Home and Away is a lifetime product deal. So as long as they're making Home and Away, it will have a home on Channel 5 as long as Channel 5 want to show it. Whereas Neighbours was like, you go make it and we'll play it for you. But then all of a sudden it's right, your costs are spiraled and we don't want to pay for it anymore. And if we don't pay for it, you need to find somebody else who will because we're paying all the fucking wages. And that's kind of where it's fallen down. And that's a real shame because I think the model they've used to fund it is what screwed them over because they've quite openly said they'd have carried on for another 30 years. And I think actually it's disappointing that by the time they get to the end, there'll be 8,903 episodes. Could they not have stung on for another 3 months?
Yeah. I mean,
that's a bit much. That's disappointing.
That is disappointing. And unfortunately, though, it is the way of the industry. Show business is an industry at the end of the day, and people need to be paid. And it's the sad truth of most TV shows that eventually they will cost more to make than they bring back in revenue because as shows get bigger and bigger and bigger, cast fees go up and up and up. The budget goes up and up and up because you're constantly trying to top yourself, and this just happens. Now, Neighbours is probably slightly different in that respect because, as we say, it does seem to keep a steady keel. It certainly did when I was watching it anyway. You have already mentioned, though, that it was all sorts of shit going on last week. But then maybe they don't care anymore because they're about to finish.
I was going to say, maybe because they're about to finish, but not only that, I mean, yes, there were lots of shenanigans going on, but actually the sets were one of the houses, the street in front of the house, and what's supposed to be some sort of prison warehouse type thing, which you need a warehouse and some shelves. Even then, it wasn't massive. And by having a relatively steady churn of cast and bringing youngsters in and bringing people through, you're not necessarily going to have these people out on massive salaries because then, well, we'll get rid of those and we'll write them out. We'll bring some new ones in who are younger and less known and less experienced, so we can pay them less.
Yeah.
Or we don't have to pay them the astronomical fees that your Carl Kennedys are going to be getting because they've been there for 30 fucking years.
Yeah, you've got your sort of built-in business model there, so we now know it in film terms as the Marvel model, you know, where you bring in a bunch of relatively unknown C-listers, support them with one or two expensive cast, and then build from within. And
you build a star, and then when they're too big, you let them go.
And you know, that's baked into a show like Neighbours, where because it's running forever, these stars can just transition through and use it as a springboard for their career, as many Australian stars have done, as we mentioned earlier on. But I think actually, you know, it's unfortunate that even though it's the exception perhaps to that rule of escalating costs versus viewing figures, it's the fact that it's an exception to that, and the fact that it is so cheap to make, and the fact that it is a continual show that actually makes it so disposable. Because yes, it's going to end next week, but then there is absolutely no reason that something exactly like it can come back in 2 months' time for a lot cheaper with a new name. Because ultimately, you know, it reinvents itself. As we said, it reinvents itself every season. It reinvents itself when we were watching it every show, more or less, because you had sort of insular storylines running with each episode. So there's no reason you can't just start again with a whole new cast of characters, call it You could even reboot Neighbours. You just move Ramsay Street down the road, for a whole new bunch of characters in, or you set it on this new estate that's going to go where Ramsay, you know, wait 5 years, and all of a sudden this is all the new houses that have been built, and here's the one legacy cast member who's still in Lassiter's. Let's be fair, it's going to be Paul Robinson. And then you start all over again, you know, and nobody would bat an eyelid. You don't even have to call it Neighbours 2 or anything like that, or Neighbours Reboot. You just call it
whatever. Just
call it Neighbours, or you call it Lassiter's if you want, and set it there. Like, it's kind of its own enemy in that respect. You know, it's both its blessing and its curse, I suppose. So, but yeah, as I say, I could talk about the storylines all night, but I don't think there's too much more for us to say about the actual show, other than, you know, as much as anything else we've talked about, this was a huge part of my childhood. Absolutely massive. And not just childhood, like through into early adulthood is the thing.
And
like,
I think this is the thing that we talk about shows, the shows that affect our childhood, and we've talked about cartoons and shows that we loved, and things that have got these some almost sort of legendary status, things like Batman and Jason, Ulysses, and actually, you think, they were massive to a relatively small group. Now, there were people who loved them, there were people who didn't like. This show was a fucking global phenomenon for 30 odd years. Nearly 40 years. And even if people didn't necessarily like it, people were aware of the show. People knew the show. I mean, of my four grandparents, one would watch it, and the other three used to take the piss. But they knew what was going on, because between their friends and between talking to me and my brother, and things would pick up. And so, we always sort of use this as a litmus test of whether my parents or grandparents or people of certain ages would know. Every fucker knew the show.
Everybody knew the show. Everybody knew the characters. And don't, like, those people taking the piss. You mentioned it earlier on with, like, the kids that would be out playing sports or whatever.
Oh, they fucking knew. They'd be taking
They knew. And certainly, like, it's funny you mentioned your grandparents, because the one thing that sticks in my mind, actually, when you say things like I said, my nan watched every soap under the sun, right? And
mine too.
Yeah, like, my granddad used to pretend that he hated it. Right, and I know he was pretending he hated it, and the reason I know he pretended he hated it, because I don't think I've ever seen him not laugh at one of Lou Carpenter's schemes. Like, he could, if you asked him to name a soap character, he would say Lou Carpenter. Like, he would come home from work, get changed, have a shower, and sit down and watch Neighbours with us, moan about it the whole time, but chuckle to himself whenever Lou did whatever.
Yeah, my grandfather was the same, and my grandfather he had a pocket electronic chess set, so a little handheld thing. And you used to move before you had you did have LCD screens, but it was an actual physical when you moved the pieces around, and there were little sensors in the squares and stuff. So he'd sit there and play that, and my gran would watch Home and Away, Neighbours, the News, the Welsh News, Emmerdale, EastEnders, and she'd have the TV for fucking hours. And exactly the same. He'd sit there and chunder about how fucking crap it was and how rubbish it was and all the rest of it. And he'd know exactly, he'd be playing chess or he'd be reading. He'd know exactly what the fuck was going on at any given point. And if she got up to go to the toilet and came back down, you'd be able to tell her exactly what she'd missed and who had done what and who'd said what.
Absolutely.
And it was always really amusing to watch.
It was. My granddad was the same with two things. It was Neighbours and wrestling, because he would do the same thing when I'd be watching wrestling. He'd be like, this is rubbish. This is all fake. And he would flat out tell me, this is all stupid. This was all fake. Never missed a show. Sat down every Friday night and watched Superstars with me. Never missed it, but complained the whole fucking way through.
Yeah.
But you knew he loved it, really. And I think it's the same thing with this. I think even people that say, oh, I don't watch soaps. And I'm one of those people, right? I don't watch EastEnders. I don't watch Coronation Street. And I actually don't, because, Sarah doesn't watch them either. So it's not like I've got to sit through them.
Yeah, same.
Right? Don't watch soaps. Fuck me, I've seen a lot of Neighbours in my time. And I'm not ashamed of that either. And I think that's all that is with those other people. There are two types of people, right? You'll either admit that you watch Neighbours and love it, or you'll pretend that you don't. But you absolutely have watched a fuck ton of it in your life. And there is no two ways about it.
I was going to say it's quite interesting now, because, and I've seen this many times over the years, where like I was bullied when I was at school, because I like sci-fi, and I like comics, and I like films. I wasn't into. I don't know. I by the time I got to the end of secondary school, I'd done wrestling before. I'd been into that when I was a lot younger, so I'd kind of grown out of it at that point. I wasn't really into rugby, and I could give a fuck about football. But I was reading books, and I was watching X-Files and fucking Star Trek and all this sort of stuff. And that was I used to get fucking bullied mercilessly about that. And then you flash forward 15 years, and the people who used to bully me are the ones bragging because they got into the first fucking screening of Avengers.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, well, no, it's exactly the same here. All these people now are coming out of the woodwork. So, oh, I fucking remember this. I used to watch it. So I was like, well, hang on, that doesn't fucking tally.
Yeah, that's it. Certainly, where this is concerned, whether you own up to it or not, like, we all know that we all watched a fuck ton of Neighbours. It's as simple as that. And it might have only been for a year, might have been for 2 years. You might still be watching it now, but there was definitely a period in your life where you watched this day after day after day.
Yeah,
and I think that's the same for pretty much everybody in the UK. Like, because we've all either grown up with it, or it was on telly when we were adults anyway. So can't escape this fucking thing. You absolutely can't. Even shifting it to Channel 5 didn't kill it, for fuck's sake.
It didn't kill it. It did a lot of damage initially.
Well, of course it did, because it's Channel 5. But it's
been on Channel 5 for a fucking long time now. I hadn't realised how quite long it's been on there.
Probably about as long as it was on BBC.
I was going to say, it's probably about, I wouldn't necessarily say half the run. I'd certainly say it's been on there about 15 years, if not more. And I should have looked that up. I could look it up now. I've got the wiki page open. I just can't be asked to turn my head. But yeah, it's one of those that you go to Channel 5. So the viewers did dip, because Channel 5, when it was in its infancy in the first couple of years of Channel 5, nobody really fucking watched it. Not that many people watch it now, I believe. I don't think it's drawn as numbers. The other sort of four terrestrial channels, or certainly all the other fucking Freeview channels and Sky channels are drawing. But it did enough just to keep it afloat, to keep it alive. And then over time, it just again steadily crept up to a point where, as I don't know whether it's doing the same numbers it was doing when it was on BBC One twice a day, but it's done enough to keep it on the air for another 15 years after it left BBC One.
Yeah.
And when you go onto the My5 app, it's always within the first couple of recommended shows, because it's on every fucking day, and you can it's one of their biggest products, so it's always on there. And when you look, it's on the top rated shows on the app, so it's doing something right.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's a shame it won't continue to do that right, but unfortunately, all good things do come to an end.
That's it, and I think I think it's funny now that so many people are coming back to it, and I include myself in this, looking at it and going, I haven't watched the show in fucking 15 years, if not longer. What's going on? Oh, it's finished, and I wouldn't mind having a look, see how they do this, that, and the other. And they will have a massive spike in viewers over the next week and a half.
Huge.
Because
Absolutely
people will
huge.
want to see people who haven't watched it in donkey years will want to see how it ends.
That's because there is so much just ingrained love for this show. And that's what it is. That's the only thing you can call it. There is just ingrained love for this show. Like, we've all grown up with it. There's a little part of it that will always carry with us, because we know those characters so well, because we spent 20 odd minutes a day with them. Yeah, we let them into our homes for 20 odd minutes a day while we were eating our dinners and getting changed to go out and doing all the other things that we did.
Yeah.
And so there's, we've talked about nostalgia a lot on this show, and actually the triggers for it. Yeah. And a lot of it is tied to time and place and emotion, and that's what these characters are. They take you back to that time. They take you back to you were 14, 15, and what you were doing. Like I say, for me, it was eating dinner, and then, certainly this time of year as well, it would still be light out. You'd go out and play for an hour or two afterwards, but you got through Neighbours first. Yeah. Because it was on, you got home from school and it was on at just the right time. It was kind of 5:20-ish. It's just after Blue Peter and News Round and stuff like that. In fact, no, it would be more like about 20-6-ish, because it was out by the 6 o'clock news. Yeah, it was done by the 6 o'clock news, because I immediately followed it, and that was the point where you were like, oh, fuck this, the news is on.
You had that bit with, like, Home and Away would finish, it would be on from like 5:10 till 5:30. And then you'd switch over, just have the last couple of minutes of Blue Peter, and then the sign off from the broom cupboard, whoever was doing that, and wherever fucking, and then you go into Neighbours, and then that would take you to the news.
The news, and then you'd be bored because it was the news. But yeah, you had just enough time. You finished school at 3:30. You were home by 4 o'clock. By the time you got changed, sorted all that out. You're ready to go. Your dinner's on the table. You watch Neighbours, and you fuck off out. And that's a memory, or some variation of that. I think that all of us have had.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, that's over, and that's where this comes from. It's just the fact that it's going. So because you can't have it anymore, people want to watch it again. That's all it is. And the truth is, it's always going to be available now because we have the fucking internet. I've watched episodes from the fucking mid-80s this week. Yeah. So we'll always have it now. But you'll never have that period again, no matter how much you chase it. And I think that's what it ties into, Yeah. But that doesn't stop you chasing it, and there's something wonderful and warm and fuzzy about that, and that's what some of these best nostalgia trips that we've had on the show have done to us. Yeah. And I certainly had an element of that with some of the shows I watch. I can't particularly say I really enjoyed them. I certainly won't go back and watch any more, but it was more the hit of, oh, I remember that character now. Oh, I remember this storyline now. These ones that are just sitting on the periphery of your memory.
Yeah.
Like we've done this episode where all of a sudden I remember the dog running into the sea, and I remember Lassiter's catching on fire, and I remember Dorothy Burke, and all of these characters that just sit on the periphery of your memory that just come flooding back the second that you're put in the right situation.
Yeah.
And I think that'll always be the case, and certainly until I'm fucking mad as a hatter when I'm like 80 years old and completely senile.
Yeah.
Well, even maybe I'll remember them even more then. I don't know.
Maybe then that'll be your life, and you go, when I used to live by this fucking hotel and it caught fire, and
yeah, exactly.
I mean, the one thing I will say, and it's we talked about how sort of realistic it is, a reflection of sort of a period and a place and time and all the rest of it. The one thing I will say is wholly inaccurate, aside from the lack of casual racism, is that nobody says the word cunt. Now, in Australia, from my experience, and I'm only speaking from my experience, it is used like a fucking comma.
Yeah, I mean, it is around here as well. It's certainly in our vocabulary, but we don't say it that much, Johnny. Not on this show, anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, So I mean that I know it's I'm speaking in jest. Obviously, it's a primetime TV show, and they would never go into. But when you look at some of the way that some of them speak, and you're thinking, yeah, people of your station, so you especially your tradies and your truck drivers and stuff like that, they're not generally eloquent enough to speak in the way that people on Neighbours speak, and they don't swear, or even there's not even a replacement for swearing. Like, you get in some shows where somebody will have a particular.
I was just about
to
say you swap it out, yeah. But,
so rather than saying fuck, you say no. I mean, a lot of Australians do say far out instead of fuck. So I mean, they don't even make the effort of doing things like substituting it for something else. I think that's something, when you look at sort of realism, you don't kind of get that. You don't have anybody with any sort of not expletive, but any sort of explosive outbursts.
But then the same is true of EastEnders as well. Every London rhino swears like a fucking trooper, and all.
I can't understand it cutting in EastEnders anyway.
No, in fact, I think I could probably understand the Australian accent better than I can the Cockney accent. And again, that comes down to Neighbours.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, we've talked about, going slightly off topic, we've talked on this show before, but so you pick up certain vernacular, you pick up certain bits of vocabulary from TV shows. Mm-hmm. And there's so many things you will have picked up without realising from shows like Neighbours.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you think, what? And I use words every now and again. Why the fuck did I say that? Why do I even know that word? Oh, I use fucking Neighbours all the time. Yep. I didn't know what a galah was for a long fucking time.
Yeah, but you've heard it that often.
I've heard it that often. That it's an insult, and actually it's not. It's a fucking bird. But it was always used as an insult because they can't call somebody a dickhead.
same as you, stuff like that. It's just all of these things that you just don't. We've got no context for them, but you hear them all the time. So it's got, I think, a huge heritage, and I think it's got a huge piece of just the collective heart of the UK. I think this show, that's the thing. I don't think there's anybody out there who hasn't sort of had their time with this show. So I'm surprised it's taken us 100 and some odd episodes to get around to it. I'm surprised we didn't even think of it originally.
To be honest, if we hadn't got to that point where we were discussing it on the show, we possibly wouldn't have thought of it for a long time to put it on. And then if it hadn't been finishing, we possibly wouldn't have chosen it now either. No,
we probably wouldn't have. But again, that's the place that it occupies in it. It's one of those things that's always with you.
Yeah.
You just don't really think about it.
I was going to say, and as I think I've used the phrase a few times, it's a constant.
Yes.
It's always going to be there. You never need to worry about it. If you want to go back into it, you can. And if you don't, well, fuck it. It doesn't really change your life if you don't go back and see it again. But yeah, the whole thing of it now going, oh, fuck, it's finishing. I haven't watched the show in 20 fucking years. I don't really care. But I'm still thinking, how are they going to finish that? What's going to happen there?
Yeah, I'm definitely curious. I probably will watch that last one.
Yeah.
But as I'm sure many people will. But yeah, in the meantime, I've enjoyed my time with it again. I can't say it's a standout of the shows that we've looked at. I can't say there's anything that was particularly remarkable about it, other than it was just like a great big comfort blanket.
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, even like I say, watching current ones and stuff, not knowing who half the cast are, but so there are enough people there who you recognise. Oh, right, okay. And then looking at the houses, as you were saying earlier, I'm going, well, it's had a lick of paint, but it's the same fucking house. And why is he in that house? That's not his house. That's his house. Why is he now staying in that one? Why is he staying with them? And just trying to piece together. And as I say, it's that sort of stuff that's ingrained in you, trying to piece together the bits that may have changed in the interim, but it's still the same fucking show, and you still got the same characters there. So it's been quite it's been an interesting experience this week. Trying to go back and get into it.
Yeah, agreed. Interesting and just really pleasant from a nostalgia point of view.
Yeah.
So look, I can't necessarily, like with some of the other shows, I can't necessarily recommend that people go back and look at this. No. All I can say is that as Mark said, it's a constant. Even when it's finished, it'll always be there for you if you want it, and if you're curious. Go back and spend a bit of time with it.
Yeah, one thing I did before we wrap up, one thing I did find really strange today is that obviously when we used to watch it, when we were younger, they didn't have mobiles. Didn't know if there was a computer, there was a big fucking desktop in a corner of a room. Now all of a sudden, watching this video, everyone's got fucking AirPods in, and they're all on phones, and they're all texting, and they're all on tablets and shit. And you're thinking, oh, this isn't fucking right. Even though I see people doing this every fucking day, myself included. Like I live on my phone. But it's Neighbours.
You expect them to be getting faxes. They always had faxes in Lassiter's. They would be getting faxes through. You don't expect them to be using mobile phones.
The whole thing of you're in this community where everybody knows each other. Yeah, okay, you might be feuding and shit, but you go next door to see somebody.
Yeah, rather than phone them. Yeah.
And that was a bit strange actually. I don't know why that rubbed up against me the wrong way, but that felt really fucking weird.
Yeah, I can imagine it did. I've not had that experience with it, but yeah, I can imagine that was quite odd.
Yeah, context-wise was really fucking weird. I don't really think I've got anything more to say about it. It's one of those shows that at one point or another in my life I loved and didn't miss, and at other points I've completely disregarded because I've got other shit to do, like watch stuff for this show and have a life. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to know what people's recollections are. I mean, as I said, everybody in this country is going to have some sort of fucking recollection, good, bad, or indifferent. And I'm very aware of friends of mine who still fucking love it to this day and never miss it. To the point that they record it because they're not on from working time and they'll watch it when they get home. Yep. And some of these people are older than others, but some are our age and will have been doing it for a long time. Some are considerably younger and have got into it probably the same way that we did. So I'd love to know what people's thoughts are on the show and what your recollections are. Let us know on Twitter at SMPDpod. You can go to our website, ddpodcast.net, where you can also pick up our previous episodes and other shows. On Facebook and YouTube with the Double Down Podcast Network. Where we get your podcast from. Like, subscribe, leave us a message. We'll get back to you the best we can. Until next time.
See you later.